What's up guys, Sean here, and today we're going to talk about the Joker movie, because depending on who you're talking to, it's either ruining society, or it's the greatest thing ever. Now this is a video that I don't enjoy making, and one of the reasons why I don't enjoy making this video is because it shows how little we've evolved over the times, contrary to popular belief about how our society is always progressing and going in the right direction. Joker, or more accurately, the press around Joker, is proof positive that that is not the case. In one corner, you have the far left, the same far left that thinks it's absolutely ridiculous for evil bad orange man to say that movies and video games are causing violence in our society, now claiming that Joker, a movie about a character who's been around for 80 years, is likely to inspire people to do violence in reality. And in the other corner, you have people in media who like to blame video games and movies for problems in the real world, all of a sudden saying, whoa, wait a minute, sir, calm yourself down. This movie is definitely not going to cause violence. Violence? Ridiculous. Now, I fall firmly in the camp that these moral panics about video games and movies are ridiculous. The data shows the exact opposite. As video games have gotten more violent, as movies have gotten more violent, our societies have gotten less violent. The idea that there is a correlation or causation between movies and real life is ridiculous. It's been disproven time and time again. So I want you to understand that's clearly where I'm coming from, and I don't want you to think I'm trying to split the baby between the right wing and the left wing when it comes to shows and movies and real world violence. Now, even with that being said, that the idea that movies and video games cause violence in the real world is completely ridiculous, that didn't stop the media from writing article after article about all the violence that the Joker movie was allegedly going to cause. The media was convinced, and they told us repeatedly that in this political climate, we were definitely not ready for a movie about the Joker, a character that's been around for 80 years getting his own movie. No way we could handle it in our society. In fact, they wrote article after article about how the Joker movie was basically going to be a manifesto, an instructional manual, inspiration for Puerto Ricans around the country to go radical and start doing violence. Oh, I'm sorry, were you guys confused by me saying Puerto Rican instead of white man? Well, Joaquin Phoenix was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, so I think that's way more of an accurate descriptor than just generic white man. Now, thankfully, despite the media trying to will violence into existence at every Joker screening across the country, there were no reported violent instances. It was so ridiculous going to see this movie on opening weekend and seeing the NYPD stationed all around the theater like it was some kind of crazy event, when again, it's just another comic book movie. Everybody needs to calm down. But the craziest thing is that after actually sitting in the theater and watching this movie, finally seeing what all the hype is about, I realized that everybody who has been talking about this movie in the media, in the immediate lead up to this movie's release, and shortly after this movie, has been completely wrong. Now, I'm going to avoid spoilers through the remainder of this video because I think if you're interested in Joker, you should just go see the movie. But unsurprisingly to anybody who paid attention to any of the trailers, all the talk about this being like an incel manifesto or having some right-wing message was completely wrong. And as I just said, it was obvious from the trailers. We saw in the trailers that this movie takes place during a sanitation strike. There are protesters that are obviously protesting for what seem to be leftist causes in the trailer. So the idea that this had some overarching right-wing message was not true from the trailers and should never have even been written about as if it was a possibility, because unsurprisingly, the politics in this movie, if there are any politics in this movie, are left-wing. Now, the reason I went out of my way to say if there's a political message in this movie, it is a left-wing political message, is because while there's nods to political causes and while there's iconography associated with political causes in the movie, the politics are incredibly superficial, and they're essentially added in to kind of give the movie the illusion of more depth than it actually has. The movie itself doesn't really have an overt political message. There's vague allusions about rich people bad, and if you want to stretch and add a political theme to this movie, you could say that the left wing will embrace a violent actor or somebody who is not well balanced if they see what they think are left-wing political values in that actor. The Joker himself doesn't really have a political goal. In fact, he states numerous times throughout the movie that he's not interested in any politics, and he didn't do any of the actions that got him notoriety that triggered the political events in the movie on purpose for political message. The other thing that was completely wrong and mischaracterized about this movie is that this movie isn't really all that violent. In fact, you could probably count the number of people who get killed on screen on one hand. And on top of that, of the first 3 people killed in this movie, 2 of them are killed in a clear-cut case of self-defense. Which means that of the 5 or so people that are killed by the Joker in this movie, only 3 of those kills can be classified as a clear-cut case of murder. So if you're somebody who's expecting to see a major bloodbath in this movie and for the Joker to just go ham and start taking out people, that's not what you're gonna get when you go and actually watch the movie. This movie has nowhere near the most violent nor the most disturbing depictions of the Joker. If you watch the movie Dark Knight Returns, the animated movie, and I believe it's in part 2 of that animated movie, the Joker in that movie is much more violent and much more disturbing, and his killings are way more horrific than anything you're going to get from the movie Joker. I would be fully comfortable showing you every single kill from the movie Joker on this YouTube channel if I had the clips available, except for maybe one, and think I probably wouldn't get demonetized for doing so. But I wouldn't even attempt to try to show you any clips from the Tunnel of Love scene in that animated movie. That's how different in scale and different in the level of horrificness the kills are from that animated movie to this movie that just came out. Now, while the left was clearly wrong about Joker in every possible way in terms of politics and content, which, tends to happen when you start judging a movie months before it comes out, the right hasn't done much better when talking about this movie. There's been a lot of talk about how there's this great critical divide between the general population and the critics, and it's represented by the Rotten Tomatoes score, which is something that we tend to see whenever these movies tend to have a far left political bias in the media. However, the critic score and the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes are really not that far off, and honestly not something that you wouldn't expect after watching the movie. In fact, the critic score on Rotten Tomatoes still has positive reviews for the Joker, and the overall score is positive even if the percentage isn't that high. In fact, the divide between critics and audiences has been way bigger in other DC properties that don't really have anything to do with politics at all. And the reason for that is that since Christopher Nolan's 2008 film The Dark Knight, Batman Frenzy has been at peak on the internet. Batman fans will support anything having to do with Batman or DC out of love for that movie, which was a great movie, but that creates the distortion on the audience side of the score rather than on the critic side of the score. Because I got news for you, the Joker movie on its own as a movie is not as good as people are saying it is. It just isn't. Now, don't get me wrong, I did actually like the movie, and Joaquin Phoenix is absolutely excellent as this character. But this is a movie that's really saved by its third act. It meanders through about 2/3 of the movie, and then when Arthur Fleck actually becomes the Joker, when he puts on the face paint and he puts on the suit, that's when this movie's at its best. But before that, it's pretty average. Now, I know a lot of people haven't seen a lot of Martin Scorsese's older movies like King of Comedy or Taxi Driver, but when you've seen those movies, you tend to recognize when a movie is basically an off-brand version of those movies with a little bit of DC Joker paint on it. And honestly, that's what this movie is for the most part. You can tell Todd Phillips is a huge fan of Martin Scorsese when you're watching this movie, but you can also tell that Todd Phillips is nowhere near as good a filmmaker as Martin Scorsese while you're watching this movie, so it just feels like an off-brand version of an older Scorsese film. Now, it is elevated by the fact that Joaquin Phoenix is killing it throughout this movie, and he's giving a fantastic performance that changes throughout the course of the movie. But in all honesty, the movie is pretty straightforward. I like to call this type of movie unpredictable for people who have never seen a movie before in their entire life. There's a scene early on where the Joker is watching TV with his mother that essentially gives away one major twist in the entire movie, and there were a lot of people who didn't see that twist coming in the theater that I was in, but that scene made it 100% obvious that that was coming later in the movie, and I can't understand people who don't see it coming later after that setup. And then, as if the movie wanted to personally insult my intelligence, right after they reveal the twist that I'm referring to, they then reveal it in an even more explicit and over-the-top way in case you're too dumb to figure out what the movie just pulled on you. Again, I'm not trying to say that the movie's bad or you're dumb if you enjoy the movie because of elements like this, but what I'm trying to point out is that everybody seems to be completely bonkers about this movie. It's not that good, but it's also not causing all this violence, and it has none of the political themes that the far left said that the movie would have. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some great moments in this movie. There's a scene near the third act of the movie that takes place in the Joker's apartment where he's visited by some of his co-workers. That is probably one of the funniest scenes I've ever seen in my entire life related to the Joker. It's perfect in every possible way, and I just wish the movie was more like that than the predictable stuff from earlier on in the film. Now, there is a moment in the movie that I did appreciate because the movie was essentially indicating that they were gonna do the terrible thing that certain origin stories tend to do and give Joker's origin, like his literal origin where he comes from, the worst possible answer. And thankfully, the movie kind of gives you a setup for that, like they're going in that terrible soap opera-y direction without actually following through. In fact, people are like, no, that is not the case. It's ridiculous that you would believe that's the case about yourself, dude. I really appreciated them not going with that explanation because that explanation would have been so bad, so cringe-inducing, that everybody in the general public, Batman fans and non-Batman fans alike, would have all agreed that this movie shouldn't exist, it never happened, and we would all pretend it didn't exist and that it never happened. That's how bad that origin that they set up and kind of mocked in the movie was. So I appreciated them not going in that direction. So all in all, the hype about Joker is much ado about nothing. This movie is not a right-wing political manifesto for white men, and it's also not this fantastic movie that the critics are just trying to force down. It's an average movie with one fantastic performance and a really good third act. Anyway, that's all I really have for you guys today. Let me know what you think about the Joker down in the comments below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias. If you want to support me, you can do so via one-time donation on Venmo, PayPal, or monthly through Patreon and Subscribestar. This has been me talking about the Joker hysteria. Till next time.